Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise basically in support of this legislation. But to begin with, Mr. Speaker, I need to draw attention to the complete shambles that has developed in this House because of the taking of urgency, and this may be one bill in the whole panoply of bills that the government has put up under urgency that actually warrants urgency, because there is some action to be taken by the 1st of April. But this is about the only one there is. And even this was teetering on the brink of not being able to be introduced into the House for its second reading because there was not a competent minister to move the motion. So the whips on the government side had no idea or no sense of anticipation around the shambles that was developing over the previous procedure and the previous piece of legislation under consideration to alert the minister in charge of this bill, the Honourable Peter Dunn, to get down to the House promptly so that he could take it up. In the event, we had two ministers sitting in the House, Honourable Chris Finlayson and the Honourable Paula Bennett, neither of whom had the wit to get up and even move procedurally or do some kind of form speech while waiting, presumably, for the whips to ring the relevant minister's office and the relevant minister to get down here pronto. This is a complete shambles, Mr. Speaker, and this is what happens when a government is trying to avoid question time, when it has been trying to use the procedures of this House in order to defend indefensible ministers. Indefensible ministers. This particular bill warrants urgency. I'm perfectly happy, and we in the Labour Party are perfectly happy to acknowledge that. We are supporting this bill. But this cannot go past without some trenchant criticism of the process by which we have got to this moment. In the urgency motion, there was a raft of legislation which did not need to be in urgency, be taken under urgency. And it was clearly a ruse and a device that allowed the government to let its panicked and panicky ministers, such as the Minister of Education, Anne Tolley, or the Minister of Housing, Phil Heatley, to get off the hook and not be subjected to the kind of grilling which their performance in the task of being a Minister of the Crown absolutely demands that they be subjected to in the process of question time. So, Mr. Speaker, this cannot go past without comment. And while we are now at the Student Loan Scheme Exemptions and Miscellaneous Provisions Amendment Bill, I have to say it is only by the skin of its teeth and by some cooperation on our part that this bill is reaching this stage in any kind of order. So that goes to the competence of the Leader of the House, Jerry Brownlee, and to the attention paid by the government whips to what is actually transpiring in the House at the time as we proceed. However, there's one other thing that I wish to raise, Mr. Speaker, in relation to the Student Loan Scheme Exemptions and Miscellaneous Provisions Amendment Bill, and that is between the time that this legislation was first introduced to the House and referred to the Select Committee, and now it appears for its second reading, we have had a change of Tertiary Education Minister. Now, while this is a bill that rightly comes under the purview of the Minister of Revenue, it is going to be interesting perhaps in the committee stages if the Minister would respond to some of this, to discover whether in fact the Minister of Revenue has briefed the new Minister of Tertiary Education about this bill, because this is about the student loan scheme. It is miscellaneous provisions. It does refer to exemptions. And, Mr. Speaker, the interesting matter is that clearly the new Minister, Stephen Joyce, brought in to repair the damaged and broken relationships between this government and the tertiary education sector that have resulted from the stewardship of the former Minister for Tertiary Education, Anne Tolley, it is going to be interesting to see whether or not the fact that the new minister has student loans in his sights has any bearing upon this current legislation. This legislation does extend the student loan scheme to all those within the realm of New Zealand, and that is a good thing, and we support that, despite the fact that there aren't many in the Ross dependency who are likely to take this up. We may have the best educated penguins in the world, but despite that, we are supportive of the extension of this clearly to people in Niue and Tokelau and the Cook Islands. However, I'm now somewhat at a loss to know quite what the direction of the student loan scheme is going to be under the new Minister of Tertiary Education, because he has made it explicit that while he acknowledges it was a, quote, political call, unquote, to maintain interest-free student loans, in other words, they would have taken a real drubbing on this issue at the general election had they not decided to continue to support it, that he clearly has decided that he will make it harder for students to access student loans. And this is clearly on the agenda of this government under the new minister. The previous minister, whose relationships with the tertiary sector were in such a parlous state that she was really beginning to not even meet with them any longer. She was busy in helicopters. However, Mr. Speaker, the point is that we have had a change in direction around student loans from the new minister. And if he is going to make it harder for people to access student loans, how does this legislation, which extends it to people throughout the realm of New Zealand, in that old terminology, how does that square with the new minister's intentions? Is it going to be harder or not? In fact, one of the provisions in this legislation will permit the Commissioner of Inland Revenue to increase the standard rate of repayment deductions from 10 to 15 cents in the dollar where borrowers had failed to have correct deductions made or failed to pay any other due amount. Now, I understand the Green Party's objection to making that burden harder, but I think it is also incumbent upon government to ensure that people are not abusing and misusing the scheme. I have to say that the vast majority of students whom I know and to whom I talk have been deeply grateful for an interest-free student loan policy because they absolutely need this money to get through their studies. The amount of abuse is infinitesimal compared with those who use the scheme for its correct purpose. But we support, albeit recognising the Green Party's objection in their minority report from the Select Committee, we are not objecting to that increase in making things, in incentivising people to get on and pay back their loan. We're not objecting to that. However, I don't see how this legislation as it stands now is going to fit with the Minister's expressed desire to make it harder for students to access loan, therefore making it harder for people to access tertiary education, and therefore reducing the number of students in our tertiary institutions, therefore reducing the expense to the government. I hope that the Minister of Revenue has in fact taken this up already with the new Minister of Tertiary Education. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.